Well, business in New South Wales today are rejoicing. According to their Premier, they won't be shut down again anytime soon. The Berejiklian government is insisting they'll avoid a Daniel Andrews-style lockdown as the state's coronavirus cases start to rise.
We can't shut down every time we have a cluster of cases. We can't keep shutting down and reopening, shutting down and reopening. That is not a good way for us to manage the pandemic, because it creates chaos for people in their lives. It creates chaos for businesses who are employing people.
It's time now for my economics panel. Tonight, joining me from Melbourne is the Herald Sun's Terry McCrann and economist and contributing economics editor with the Australian newspaper, Judith Sloan, also in Melbourne. I hope you are both socially distanced. I'll start with you, Terry McCrann. What did you make of Premier Berejiklian's comments there? She's pretty firm they'll not head down the same path as Victoria.
Well, I can certainly hope that she is able to continue down that path. But if she gets into a Victorian situation where you've got hundreds of cases every day, that's really going to test that resolve. I mean, Victoria's problem is the national problem now, very clearly. We are all Victorians in the sense that you cop the negatives from Victoria, both the virus negatives and the economic negatives. So this is going to take a long time to play out. Victoria is justly the pariah state, and it's hurting everybody in Australia.
Judith Sloan?
Look, I agree with that, and I think they were strong words from Gladys, and I think she has a reasonable grip of the dilemma. And it goes back to the point you were talking with Jane Holton about, which is the suppression, or I would also say living with, versus the elimination strategy. There is no way we can run with the elimination strategy, short of closing the international borders pretty much forever and possibly closing the state borders for a very long time. So we really have to have, I think, a nuanced and mature debate about how we deal with this. And if there are flare-ups in certain parts of the state or associated with particular activities, we need some sort of targeted measures. Because, you know, after the first lockdown, I was quite confident that the economy could bounce back. But after this second one in Victoria, it's looking much more gloomy.
I think the worry too, Judith, and I agree with you, I was fairly confident coming out of the first lockdown, also particularly I think because Australians handled it broadly so well. But then we have the circumstance now that it's the government and the processes, you know, allowing people to march in the street when everyone else was doing the right thing. There's certainly the systemic failures with testing and the calamity of, you know, private security guards running the hotel quarantining. All of those put together, I think I've lost confidence in the Victorian government's ability to handle the situation, and Victoria's skyrocketed, and Terry, now it looks like it's starting to affect New South Wales. It's the confidence in the people who are supposed to be setting the architecture to protect us that's fallen away, hasn't it?
Well, absolutely, Peter. This was a stuff-up which was totally avoidable, both in terms of the specific failure in the quarantine, but also in the message that Daniel Andrews sent out with the Black Lives Matter protest, that we didn't have to social distance. That was an extraordinarily terrible message to send out, and you can see how quick it gets run away. I agree.
Judith, I want to ask you about comments today from... I think your lines are getting a bit scratchy. I'll go to Judith. Judith, I want to ask you about some comments from Restaurant and Catering Chief Executive Wes Lambert, who says they want to continue JobKeeper in the current form at a minimum for affected industries like theirs. Now, how do you keep it going at the same level, given the cost of the budget? But also, we're hearing from more and more businesses there's actually a disincentive because a lot of the workers, 2/3 of casuals we know, get paid more now to stay home than they were paid before this crisis. Where does the government go here?
Look, I think the government has to tread very carefully on this. I think one can understand that this was rolled out quickly, but I think there are some quite serious design faults. To tell you the truth, including the fact that a number of people are paid more on JobKeeper than they were previously paid. And I guess it's anecdotal, but there is certainly evidence that people are reluctant, people on JobKeeper and JobSeeker, to actually turn up for work when asked to, because they're better off sitting at home. So, I think I'll be very interested. So July 23 next week, there will be an economic statement, and that I think might lead to some announcements about what they intend to do about JobKeeper. I understand the point that, for example, international tourism, parts of the hospitality sector which are still subject to lockdown, what hope have they got? This is not a recession like another recession. This is a government-induced recession. So I think there will have to be a kind of detailed and nuanced response. But I can't see either JobKeeper or Seeker going for much longer, partly because the fiscal costs are just so enormous. We're talking about a potential deficit next year of $200 billion. We were bragging about the possibility of there being a surplus, and now we're talking about a deficit that we have never come close to.
You're absolutely right. And of course, we're looking at $1 trillion sort of debt. We won't know that in final terms till October. Where do you think they'll go on JobKeeper in the announcement next week, Terry?
Well, I think there has to be some extension, Peter, given particularly what's happened in Victoria and the way that's going to impact on the national economy. But these things are changing all the time. I mean, next week is too early in a sense in responding to what's happened in Victoria. We don't know how it's going to play out. But some extension, I agree with Judith that it needs to be modified. It needs to be made much more fit for purpose.
All right, let's have a look at the whole issue about the real estate market, because as we know, it underpins, it certainly is a carrier of debt for most Australians, but it underpins so much of our economy. We're told that more than half of the properties taken to auction since April couldn't sell under the hammer. There's a ban on open for inspections. It's also making things very difficult. And on the bank of mum and dad, I said this at the outset, I don't think this bank has ever closed, but it's going to be the entry point for a lot of people to buy homes. There's talk, though, that the first home buyer market is a little bit interested because interest rates are low and there's opportunity for young people. What do you think there, Judith?
Look, I think that may be some sort of upside of what's happening. I mean, speaking at a personal level, I think there are two things you can do for your children: give them a good education and help them to buy a house. I mean, it's a really important policy point, and I think Tim Wilson's about to release a book taking this up. You probably should interview him in due course, that home ownership is the bedrock of so many good things, including eliminating or avoiding relative poverty in older age. So, I think the fact that mums and dads are prepared to help their children is no bad thing. I mean, there are traps, let me put it that way. You probably want to take out a loan agreement. You probably don't want to act as guarantor. But personally, I think that if parents and grandparents have some sort of excess money, this is a good outcome, and actually having some vibrancy in the real estate market is actually a kind of a welcome antidote to some pretty miserable conditions in the economy more generally.
Terry, last comment to you, and that statistic is first home buyer inquiries have more than doubled last month compared to the same time last year. Now, it might be the home builder scheme as well, but what do you make of it all?
Well, it's certainly the home builder scheme, but as Judith says, first home buyers are able to come back into the market given interest rates and given what's happened to the property market more generally. But the sword of Damocles hanging over the property market is the banks can't keep deferring those loan repayments indefinitely. And if they come back and say, you've really got to start paying your home loans back when the economy is still sick and the employment is still very poor, that's going to be a real blow to the market.
Absolutely. Terry McCrann, Judith Sloan, thank you very much for your time tonight.